record that as well. So my name is Holger Dörkmann. I work as an independent consultant, but also speaking here on behalf or in my role as senior advisor for the Volvo Research and Educational Foundation. We also have the director from VREF also here, Henrik. So we're both happy also to answer any questions around the program. In fact, there's one of the new programs from VREF started, so like the process started about 2 years ago, where we also decided also to launch formally also a program which is called Informal and Shared Mobility in low and middle income countries. And so we have the primary objective to really contribute to more equity and sustainability in the urban transport system by supporting research which creates new knowledge to better inform stakeholders, to govern, design, or to develop shared and informal mobility and contribute to better access to goods and services for all. So really focus on low middle income countries. And we were mostly also the foundation focus on supporting and working also with research organizations and particularly so universities, but also we're keen on also bringing that together also into really also researchers for applied action and impacts. In the last 2 years, we already also did quite a lot of work supporting different pieces, informing also what we call our roadmap. And you see here the details, which I strongly recommend also for those who are more deeply interested in the discussions to look into also that. You see also the website where you can also download all the reports, apart from the last one, which actually I'm very pleased that we're working also with Agile City also to work on the data piece, and Benji will talk in a minute a little bit more about that. Just one final information. So we will have in the new program, which will last at least 5 years, probably also longer, 3 key areas of action. We look into knowledge building. So we had done a larger call for research proposals, which is now also closed, and will also go in the second round, where we also have long-term research, but we will look also into specific topics also over the years. We're really also eager, and that's why we also want to work also with DT4A and others to really create and help to support also a community of learning. So bringing also the network also closer together, as well as will provide also support for the next generation scholars through scholarships and other opportunities. And we will focus particularly on 3 topics. One will be on the integration also of informal and shared mobility. The second around is how to govern that, and finally is how we can also look more and have more research around the impact from the social to the environmental to the economic one. So that's a little bit about that. So please sign up as the newsletter or also to look at the website. I'm happy also to provide more information. So thank you so much also for giving the opportunity at this webinar, and now handing back to Hein, and then looking forward to the presentation by the whole team of Agile City, which is great to work with. Thank you.
Thanks, Holger. Julia, would you like to share your screen?
Yes, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. I'm Julia. I'll be opening the presentation on behalf of Agile City Partners, but I'm joined here by my colleagues, Benji de la Peña, and also Zach Abraham is here with us. And I think Sarah is also here joining from the Philippines, our whole research team, and maybe Ia as well. Can you go ahead and, are you able to see this? Great.
Yes.
So what we have done, which Holger mentioned, is we had an initial memo to VREF, which we have now expanded into this global scan of data collection efforts, which we're going to share with you today on informal transportation and shared mobility. We started this project actually back in November of 2020, the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation, with a shared belief that informal urban transportation systems are powerful engines for economic mobility. We know they provide livelihood. We know that they drive local economy, and we know that without this type of public transport, economy cannot function. And for creating more sustainable and inclusive cities, this is something that a type of mode of transport that serves so many types of diverse communities that have so many different types of unmet needs, and that is being provided for by informal transportation. So we formed this global partnership with the New Cities Foundation, and Agile City Partners has been developing work around this and are very happy with our partnership now with VREF. We're going to take a short Mentimeter just to kind of have an icebreaker, hear from all of you first about what is the most popular form of transport where you live today. So I'm really interested to see, and you can use the local term of what it's called. You don't have to just say, bus, you can say the local name. You'll find the Mentimeter login code, the code for the contribution is here in yellow. And I will go ahead and share that screen and see some of your answers.
Julia, could you share that code again? There it is.
84834823. Feels like bingo or something. Anybody got bingo? I think Zach's also is putting it into the chat in case you wanted to put it there.
Julia, I'm afraid also there's a different setup. Also, like currently the question is what data would help decision makers better, not the one you raised there. At least that's mine.
Yeah, it's the second question that's coming up.
Oh, for that code?
Yeah, for that code.
Let's see.
Oh, it's the same code. Yeah.
Is it the same code twice?
Let me see.
Should be.
Yeah, it's the same code twice.
Okay, 1 second. All right, maybe if you want to just put it into the chat, we can just go ahead and put it into the chat box. If anyone wants to chat it in there. Let's see, we have an autobus or a minibus, trotro, minibus taxis. All right, it's a lot of minibus, city bike. Oh, that's nice. Bicycle, walking. Oh, I can't pronounce this.
Twejerani? How do you say that, Ali?
Agra. That's
Agra.
probably,
Sorry, I keep mixing it up.
Matatu minibus.
Amharic.
Sorry, it's not Agra, it's Estelin.
Oh, sorry. You were using his account.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that. So Twegerane. Twegerane means paratransit. It is in Kinyarwanda language.
Oh.
Very interesting. So it seems, I think that, Keke na Pep.
I've heard of Keke na Pep.
So these are mostly four-wheeler, it seems. We have two and four wheels, looks like. If I have to guess the majority of the modes. So it's interesting though that everybody can come up with one right off the bat. So it's something that we know is very common to a lot of the cities where we live, serving a lot of the communities that we are a part of. Go back to my slides. So that's one of the reasons that we feel this work is so important, is because it's something that's extremely visible on our streets in our daily lives, but less visible in the policies and the investments that we see in the places where we work. And similar to how Shack and Slum Dwellers International think about informal housing, this can be said also for any other type of transportation. The first act of inclusion is to be counted. So that's why this work on data is so important. Who is counting it? What's being counted? And how does that give us a picture of what the scale of this type of transportation system is, and therefore being able to identify the needs and the priorities in order to make it, to increase the benefits that are offered from it, and also at the same time reduce the drawbacks and help maximize this as an opportunity for all. So going into these research questions, I'll invite Zax, who led our research team, to talk about what was guiding us as we set about doing this rapid global scan of where data exists and how we have been able to categorize some of our findings. Zax, please go ahead.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so we
Zax
begin
joins
this
us from
section
New York,
with...
I should mention.
Hi. Yes, hello, everyone. So we begin this section with a refresher of terms. So our research focuses on definition based on how said transportation is used. So for shared mobility, we broadly refer to it as transport services owned and operated by the private sector or government, supported by technology and involving the shared use of different modes of transportation. So for example, car, bike, scooter, etc. And that it operates under an established system within a defined geographic scope. On the other hand, informal transportation, we refer to it as transport operations with some measure of informality, which may include unscheduled services, flexible routes, varying degrees of organization amongst drivers and operators, as well as varying levels of government regulation. So for this research, we looked into 7 critical questions. What type of data is collected? Who is collecting it? How is data characterized? What are the motivations? What roles do governments play? How is data managed, archived, and protected? And lastly, we look at the gap. What did we not find or find little of? Next slide, please. So for this research, we used online searches and desk research to gather information and answer the critical questions I just mentioned. We also reached out to around 200 of our contacts from the Global Partnership for Informal Transportation to seek any information, leads, or guidance on the project that we are undertaking. Our keywords included informal transportation, paratransit, shared mobility, ride sharing, ride hailing, bike sharing, scooter sharing, combined with data or data collection, and then the specific name of the country or the region. And we use this as a starting point for research via websites such as Google, Google Scholar, academia.edu. And then the further search on the subjects were used in journal archives and repositories. We conducted the research for around 5 weeks, starting around September and ending in end of October. So, Julia? Okay, so what did we find? What we found was that most of the data collection activities were happening in primary cities like the national capitals or major metropolitan areas. In lower middle income countries, this is likely due to the presence of larger universities and research institutions, and the presence of the startup ecosystems in the capital cities. There tends to be a bigger data gap in secondary or tertiary cities, where informal transportation is usually more prevalent, relevant, and necessary. Next, we know that shared mobility data is collected wherever they operate, especially when a technological, i.e. app-based component is present. What we've seen is that data collection is used, published, shared, etc., more by different stakeholders in higher income countries. We also know in high-income countries, informality likely exists and are sometimes niche, such as the use of immigrant-based transportation. It is not as widely reported and documented. So we say that informal transport data collection is concentrated in lower and middle income countries. Our research also tried to scan all global geographies, but we had varying degrees of successes depending on the region. Although we've covered most regions, we were thin on Central Asia and Eastern Europe, MENA, and Portuguese Africa. Most of the data we gathered in Central Asia and Eastern Europe have been sparse, with the bulk of the data focusing on shipping, freight, and logistics. Lastly, most mobility data was less basic statistical data. We gathered a huge focus on mapping routes against available street network data. This is likely due because a lot of the data gathering happens through location and tracking apps on mobile phones. Statistical data has been harder to collect, and so few of the NGO-led efforts are doing it. Next slide. This is a visual representation of where we were able to collect data.
Thank you so much, Zax.
All right.
So I'm going to go through a couple of the highlights. In our report, we have actually a breakdown by all of these questions where we go through a lot of our findings. I'm just going to give you a few of them today, not to take up, all of your time. Some of the driving motivations that we found, for shared mobility data collection, we're talking about outside of the company operations, because we know really why, the companies are collecting it for their own improved service, customer satisfaction, where to develop new business. So outside of the company operations, the shared mobility data is really used for government oversight. You're talking about using it for planning, for regulation or compliance, and maybe the fee collection around these services. The type of data that they are collecting for that includes real-time routes, frequencies, and origin and destination. Whereas with informal transportation, a lot of times that data is being mapped, it is being sourced to try to understand what is the system on the ground, what is the extent of that network, where is it operating, and how far does the route extend. So this might include the number of operators, the routes, the demand behavior, and through GTFS. So that's a big difference, is looking at how tech has played a role in giving us this picture of what is existing on the ground. So in higher income countries where shared mobility is operating and is using technology to drive that network, what we're seeing is that these services obviously would not be able to exist without the tech platform. So if you're looking at data that is gathered through the tech platform, it is going to give you a pretty good picture of what the service is, where it operates, because it knows what it's doing. Whereas for informal transportation, just getting information from the app that is helping to organize this service will not necessarily give you the complete picture of what's happening on the ground, because these services are grafted onto the pre-existing networks that have already been developed through franchises, through neighborhood operations, or through larger citywide networks. So what happens here is you might be able to get a snapshot of the operation, of its reach, of ridership, but you're not going to get the complete picture. In terms of our data sources, so where are we able to find who is contributing to these, to the data that we have seen? So we broke them down to these categories. The largest contributor by far that we found is the multilateral and bilateral development agencies. So these would be your Asian development banks with projects such as the Asian Transport Outlook, 450 indicators, looking at all types of transport data, but including things like the two-wheel mode share, and even non-motorized two-wheel mode share that could include rickshaws and bike share systems. Also looking at intermediate public transport. So how are people getting in between the bus station and the train station, last mile trips, things like that. So that's one example. The German Agency for International Cooperation, they also have the TUMI Mobility Hub project, Mobility Data Hub project. And then you have also examples like JICA that are maybe doing, that in cases that we found, looking at mode share on informal paratransit as part of a larger transport study for a transport master plan leading to an infrastructure project. So by far, we found the most examples under this category. The next one that we found a lot of examples for is under nonprofit and non-government organizations. So these are your Trufia Association, all of you here today, DT4, Datum, the organizations that are working on data collection and analysis for different motivations. We found a lot of examples under this category. And then the third largest was private sector companies who are getting contracts either with the multilateral or the local government or our other partner companies. In Africa, these include, Goa Sendal, Where's My Transport, and also a lot of local startups that we found, such as Warren Mobility, Addis Map, Go Metro, and Khartoum Map. So, this is some of the examples we found for startups in Africa. And as I go through this, I really welcome you to, in the chat group, go ahead and throw in some more examples. We're also hoping to learn from you here. Probably more examples on the ground. One of the things that we found is we, in terms of finding, going through the research that we were going through, a lot of it is going to be word of mouth as well. So your local knowledge would be very useful here. Research and academic institutions, I think Holger mentioned earlier also about, Roger Behrens out of the University of Cape Town. The Center for Transport Studies is producing so much work in this area. Also the university in Bangkok, UC Bartlett, Columbia University in New York. These are definitely concentrations of work happening at the university level on mapping, also on different types of new forms of data collection and analysis that are contributing to the field. And we also see an interesting sector, which is gig workers. So these are workers who have come together to try to advocate for their rights in the gig work shared mobility world. So this is Driver Seats Cooperative, Worker Rights Info Exchange. It depends, the size of the network might not be so big, as big as, for instance, the professional associations that we found for the Boda Bodas of Kenya, but they are pockets where there are numbers of workers being counted, conditions and labor statistics that are also interesting to access. Also under professional organizations, the Global Labor Institute, for instance. And then we have the private philanthropies. So this could be the Rockefeller Foundation for Digital Matatus, which Benji was a part of, a pioneer, and of course foundations like VREF funding this type of research. So within these categories, you can also see that there's a siloing of information. So whether it's project driven, whether it's advocacy driven, or whether it's profit driven, a lot of this information is staying in these silos, and so we often don't see the sharing of that information as widely as we might like. The role of government. So what we found again is, and again, we would like an opportunity to be able to talk and learn from more local and national governments. Not all of them are going to publish their reports in a way that maybe we can readily access, but from what we found, we believe that governments are supporting but rarely leading the data collection. So in the shared mobility portfolio, this means that the governments and private sector players are accessing shared mobility data. And there's often a conflict in terms of how that is shared with government, whether or not that is transparent, whether, the type of data that is shared. So even if governments have some access to it, how much access do they have? And if there is a negative finding, how readily available is that in terms of if there's a conflict between the rideshare company and a local public transportation plan, for instance. So the transparency issues here are clear in some cases, but again, it's still the government trying to access data that is collected by a secondary source and not them themselves. In informal transportation, governments are not really collecting this data, except if they are participating in a volunteer effort or, again, a private sector actor. This could be because it's project-led. There's some kind of multilateral agency that is involved to lead the data collection in partnership with the government. And the government might decide to allow the data collection or be a participant in some way, but it's not leading the project. The exception that we did find for this was in China. So China does have a local traffic management bureau under the within the National Bureau of Statistics. So that feeds information to the National Bureau of Statistics. They have information such as vehicle registration and transaction data that they regularly collect as part of their operations. So what we might see in other cases would be a one-time data collection around a regulation issue or in response to some type of initiative by the government, by a local government entity, in the worst case scenario to eliminate a service, for instance. But we did find this example from China. Maybe there are others that you are aware of where you live and work. And then lastly, in terms of the opportunities, I'll let Benji go ahead and wrap us up here to talk about what are some of the gaps that we found and the areas of opportunity moving forward.
Thanks, Julia and Zax. A reminder to everyone, we didn't collect any of this data. It was a meta study and a scan of who's collecting data. And as we looked through it, we were like, so what's sticking out? What are the opportunities? One was that stuck out for us was even in the research pieces, unless they were releasing the spreadsheets or the databases themselves, we couldn't figure out what data they were collecting apart from GTFS if they were using GTFS. And so we thought there should be some way, some sort of protocol to report we're collecting informal transport or shared mobility data, and apart from the location data or telemetry, we also collect this, right? And so we think that there's an opportunity there to have a standard protocol, particularly for research in academic and research institutions, to publish it and release it so that then it's easier to then compare. So again, outside the GTFS or whatever data standard has been agreed upon. There was also a lack of transparency. I guess it's really more of reporting, right? And this also shifts from shared mobility to informal transportation. The private companies, of course, are collecting way more data than we know, and they have the advantage of being in data ecosystems where they can pull data from other apps or other behaviors, particularly with the phone. So there's not much of a transparency. There could be some sort of a call for transparency. Even in the new apps that are imposing themselves or are grafting onto informal transportation, there's not a clear transparency on what data is being collected. That's related to the third point, which is we have not developed ethical guidelines for data collection. And I know DT4 is committed to open data, which is really great, but the whole, what are the guidelines for collecting this data, storing this data, and who gets access to it, right? And so beyond just saying it's all open, the data collection itself needs some sort of ethical guidelines. Then biggest gap, right, is like, because most of the work is about routes, we do not have statistical data, basic data like how many vehicles or who drives them or who rides them, the kind of demographic data that only becomes available if there was a specific project, usually for a transportation project that will impact the existing services. Static data, right? So not locational or GTFS or geographic data. data on labor and workforce and business data. And one of the things we like to talk about is informal transportation. Our SMEs, they're small and micro enterprises. We have very little data, if any, of what are the sizes of these firms, what is their daily take, what's the share of investors, and then the labor and workforce too. Even in the shared mobility companies, that's not reported at all. How many drivers do they have? How many contractors on rebalancing the systems? That's not reported at all. We couldn't find local or national-led examples where it was the local cities who would say we're going to collect this data, except of course in high-income countries where mostly it's a conflict or negotiation about obtaining data. And then we said it earlier, right? Not much on peri-urban, rural, or secondary or tertiary cities, where, as someone pointed out in the chat, is like Abdurrahman was saying, well, the big cities have economic impact, but someone else pointed on the chat, I think it was Winnie, is that there's rapid growth in the secondary and tertiary cities, and even weaker government institutions. And so that's where we need a lot of information and data. Okay, I'm gonna pass it on to, I think we have the Mentimeter question. All right.
Yeah, so let's try this code again. So before we go into our discussion, wanting to hear from you all, and I think so that's a great contribution from Winnie already. What data would help decision makers better understand informal transportation or shared mobility? If you want to go ahead and put it into that code. So for instance, if it's from the rapidly growing secondary and tertiary cities, that's a great insight. So please go ahead and
can you share us the numbers again?
It's here, the 84834823.
And reposting there it is.
Here we go. Let's see. Financial data, frequency, pricing, GTFS routes, user surveys. Interesting. Yeah, the user surveys. It's very important. So not just where is it going, but whether or not is this a dignified mode? Is it safe? Is it getting me? Is it affordable? Is it a service that that can be improved?
Julia, can you refresh
Pricing.
your tab?
Mm-hmm. 1 second.
Over on the other end.
Did not do it.
Yeah.
Let's see. Here we go. Labor. Okay, look at that coming out. Is that because of, let's see, frequency, data from academia? Mm-hmm. I'm guessing, we can talk about that in the discussion, but I'm assuming that, data from academia, once it's published in one circle, how do we find it? We found also with informal transportation, there might be a lot of information or projects related to it that aren't in transport planning. For instance, what if it's in anthropology and we just don't know to search for it there? So how do we find it across disciplines as well? Great. I'm going to take a little screenshot of this, put it in the chat group, and we'll go to our Q&A. So we wanted to just hear from you a little bit about what do you think we are missing still from what we have presented today. Of course, we only presented you some highlights, but would be very interested to hear from you if there's kind of anything glaring that we should make sure to look into, if there's just something that you want to share more generally about this work and this topic.
Jackie put in the chat that there is a DT4 pledge that she put in the link, which it's not yet. I think it is the Foundations for Ethical Principles, but that's good to know.
Great, thank you so much, Jackie.
Jackie has her hand
Jackie,
raised
go
too.
ahead, hand up. Yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, I think one thing that's missing is the emissions data as well. That's really, really important. That's tied to public health issues, to our climate concerns, and could be a potential source of financing as well. I think we've talked about this, and I know WRI is doing a report, and Benji and I have talked about this, but I think we should somehow start integrating that into our discussions of other kinds of data.
Definitely.
I agree. And someone also pointed out vehicle data, which those two are closely tied, right? If we don't know what vehicles they are, we won't be able to measure the emissions. Julia, can we stop screen sharing just so we can see everyone's faces?
Oh yeah, sorry, can you not see?
Unless you're in an embarrassing situation visually, please do turn on your camera so that we can see. And then we can just have a freewheeling discussion.
And please go ahead and raise your hand or just jump in if you would like.
Winnie, do you want to comment on the comments that you have contributed? Don't want to put you on spot, but it's a...
No, I think I've already shared. It can be read. I'm just concerned that higher education and government don't pop up as a source, which is true. Many times when we are looking for data, we just end up with the World Bank, EU. You don't really get local. So really, for me, there is really need to think out how governments working with universities can, work towards generating some of the relevant data, especially in this context of climate change and all the challenges that the world is facing. That's the only way out, because if, for example, developing countries like Africa rely on a big project somewhere, funded from somewhere, they need to put a budget, and many countries have put very minimal budget. Like I think my country is 2% for research, and that usually just catered for small little research for maybe master's students or so, and small few limited. So there is really, that's where for me the future lies, especially for these secondary cities. If we don't secure them now, we will just be going back to what we are crying over in primary cities. So the concentration and focus on secondary cities is really great, and it seems a lot of work is now focusing on these cities. Thank you.
Thank you, Winnie. You said a lot of work is focusing. Do you think that this is work from universities that you're mentioning that's focusing on secondary and tertiary? Okay.
Yes. Now we see more of even small. It's just that they are small case studies, You have case studies covering small secondary cities. And for countries that have decentralized like ours, which have counties, you are seeing more of interest in people studying how those local units work.
Very interesting. Thank you. Abdul Raham?
What would be very interesting is the method data access. Like we went through all these different cities. I'd be very interested in hearing about like how did you manage to get the data? Is it like a data portal, so the government is hosting a data portal, or you're accessing like maybe a GitHub repository, or because this I think is important in terms of data accessibility. When you go into looking at a place and you find like the statistics agency has like a fully comprehensive digital data, that minimizes the barriers to access data. That's one example. So
I think that's a really great point. And, also to clarify, right, in our research, we didn't actually touch the data. So for particular academic research, a lot of them said they did research, but not necessarily releasing the data itself. But that your point of, how would you access the data? Is there some sort of protocol? But then that also interacts with ethical guidelines, right, of who gets to access that data. A point I was making at the TUMI Mobility Hub project first meeting was that access to data is a power relationship, right? So who gets that access gets more power. And very often as you extract that data, the people you got that data from, and this is particularly of operators, don't have access to that data and don't benefit from it. So I think both, how can you access that data, but also who gets to benefit from that data?
Sometimes I feel like the university, whoever published the paper, it's the data is not always open, like because they have like even for the researcher, they have that very specific scope of how to use the data. So they use it and then they publish it, and that go back to whoever the proprietary owners are. That for legals or like the copyright reasons.
I think too that for most academic research, right, it's like it's a submission for your PhD, right? So you're just satisfying your jury and your advisor, and as long as they're happy with your research, there is no further who will this benefit, right?
If I
there was
may answer the question on
go ahead,
the researcher side, a lot of the access we have is because of the many years and networks that we have. If we didn't have this, we wouldn't have the lead that we were able to get. Another reason we were able to have like a huge net is because I personally have an alumni access from UCL, and one of our researchers is currently taking her master's at the University of Leeds. So both of our universities have this huge repository of data. If we didn't have that, we ourselves would not be able to do the research that we are doing at the moment. So yeah, data sharing, data transparency is really a topic that we should be discussing. Accessibility is a topic that we should be talking about.
Jackie mentioned here in the comments about telecoms also being a data source. How might we go about that, though? Do you think? What would be the best way to?
Well, there are business models, right, that sell that data.
Yeah.
We talk about invasive data because that's every phone owner is a unique travel pattern.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, go ahead, Jackie.
Yeah, I know there's an effort to try to lobby some of the telecoms to make some of that anonymized data available. And that's why I think that having maybe another webinar that sort of looks at the overall ethics around data, not just like researchers collecting data and, using good principles, but also, some of these big actors that have a lot of data and are not sharing it. You can even think about Google that uses our free GTFS that transit agencies produce for its maps and apps, but doesn't really contribute to any of the creation of the data. So I think there's a big opportunity to have some really important discussions around governance and ethics of data and how we can move that forward, for all these different important purposes of, inclusion, better transit, so forth.
I'm sharing the link here. If you're interested in presenting, we'll book.
You can sign up.
We'll book until June, but it's gonna go go by pretty fast. So we'll be June in a blink. So yeah, usually it's happening on Wednesday, mid of every month. We'll try. This is a pilot, very informal. So I'm just putting the link here.
So I want to respond. Thank you, Hein. Please sign up. I'll look forward to hearing your presentations. I want to respond to Solomon's comment here. I think definitely, he says, there are cities, there might be instances without any public or private entity gathering data on informal transportation. We believe that to be absolutely true. I mean, especially if you're talking about the cities where rideshare, where there isn't a centralized business model, where I can think of cases, and another work we're doing with UNDP, in a case in Togo, for instance, the majority of the ride rides that are provided on motorcycles are individual owners. And so there's really not a larger company that might be collecting that data. There's, from our understanding, not a government agency that is collecting that data either. So we can imagine that there are so many cities, primary, secondary, and tertiary, that may not have the data being collected at all. But for sure, there were countries where we didn't find data on this, despite searching for it. So I think that could definitely be true.
I think that the question that arises then is, how do you mandate this in some way, or empower it or force it, right? And there are kind of probably global instruments, like if WRI has reported in a recent paper with you, Hein, right, that informal transportation or transportation doesn't really show up very much in the NDCs. And so requiring the collection of that data, both as for the NDCs or maybe as a reporting to SDG 11, that could be interesting. The other is that we need to build up that expertise within government institutions and see it as a technical capacity, along with all the other technical capacities that they have picked up, but that needs to happen. The third thing I think that would be really interesting from informal transportation side is how the operators themselves are starting to use technology, mostly to circumvent the operators. And so I like citing her work, but Rida Quadri's work there of how the object operators in Indonesia are using their own apps, or apps that they've developed is happening too in India. And also we had I'm going to blank out on his name, speak at one of our meet and greets, and he was saying this is how we subvert it. Jeffrey was saying we'll subvert it by using the Safe Boda app, and then when we get there we'll cancel it, and then we'll just book it. And so I think there's really interesting studies on both the way the data is used or not used and subverted.
Our colleague Andrea has a comment here that in her experience working in Costa Rica, the governments have told them that they're not responsible for collecting data on informal transportation because it's not regulated. It's not legal, so therefore why would they collect information on it, right? So that's something that could be faced in a lot of contexts as well. And this goes back to inclusion. The start is to be counted, because if they don't want to see it, and if the idea is not to recognize it as a legitimate form of transport, why are you going to count it? So there's a bit of paradigm shift that also potentially needs to happen in order for people to want to collect the data on informal transportation, recognizing that that does deserve to be counted. There's also that barrier. Is that anyone else's experience here? Yes, please. Oh, had a hand and then disappeared.
You're muted, Maliki. We couldn't hear you. We can't hear you.
Hello.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yeah, I was saying that this was the case in Egypt, particularly in Cairo, until very recently, when by very recently, I mean like 4 or 5 years ago, when study after study kept showing that most daily trips, actually more than 60% were done by informal transport. This is where, with the massive investment in like mass transit projects, this is when the government started to pay attention that we need to measure this mode of transport. Even it doesn't have to mean that they are willing to accept it, but they have to measure it at the very least. They have to recognize it.
And was that also to try to figure out how to reorganize all of the public transport trips and figure out the most efficient route? It's sometimes, when it comes top down like that, the motivation is to make all the routes more efficient, which could mean taking out some of those informal trips.
True. One example was like the BRT on the ring road, so the main highway surrounding inner Cairo, where they want to cancel the trips that go on the ring road and make them act as feeders. But then use the parameters from the existing patterns from the informal transport to come up with the operational parameters for the BRT. You know, so the ridership, the current ridership, and all of that. So yeah, it's on a project by project basis. I don't think anyone looks at the whole network holistically and try to intervene on that level, at least not here.
Yeah, and it's interesting what several of you put in as type of data that would be useful is user surveys, because it's often thought that if we have a chance to formalize the whole transportation system and organize it for transport efficiency, that a lot of those informal trips will be feeder routes or there'll be intermediate trips. Whereas if you look at some of this, I think if we look at some user surveys, like we've seen in some of our research, this is not just a last solution. This is sometimes the preferred solution, right? It is the type of trip and it's the type of service that people want to take because they like the service. It's not just a last resort. So I think the user survey would also give a much better view into why people use it, what they're using it for. I can't bring my my market shopping on the bus, and I can way better go from the market to my house with a tricycle, for instance. So I think the user surveys would give us a bigger indication of that as well. Having a study I'm looking at the comments in informal transport. Notice the government will not want to provide information on informal transport because they want to hide the contribution of the system. Yeah. And the user surveys are not usually given the same importance as the route network data. Exactly. Wonderful. Well, Hein, I hope that we can save this chat thread because there's a lot of great information in here, links and other leads that we'd like to follow up on.
Yeah, that's a good question. I hope it's saved automatically. The video is recorded, so it was the video for sure. Yeah, so we'll find out about the chats, hopefully.
I'll go ahead and save the chat right now.
I think it does get saved. So we do recordings on Zoom, and there's text, there's audio, there's video.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you, everybody, like Benji, Julia, and Zach for this presentation. So I hope this is a good format. We're just doing this informally and testing this out. So the next month it's going to be mobility data. Tudo is here, so she'll be presenting more about data standardizations. It's going to be on January around 18. So we look forward to seeing you. And then again, if you have opening public announcement, like community announcement that you want to make, just like Hugo did, please let me know. Put it in I will also send out the document for everybody to contribute. So see you next time. Thank you very much.